John Colianni's on the line right now. John, welcome to WPFW.
Hey, Rusty, how are you doing? Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. It's been a bit since we got to talk, and I thought with the new release out, it'd be a good time to talk on the air.
I should say so. Yes, indeed.
Since it's been quite a while since we've known each other. In fact, I mentioned in the liner notes how we met at that first Thelonious Monk piano competition back, was it 1987, I guess?
Yeah, that's true. It was the summer, I think, of 1987, and I was just a shaver at the time, and as were most of the participants in that competition. A lot of them have gone on to illustrious careers in music, obviously.
Well, you did quite well yourself. So, but by then you had already worked with Lionel Hampton for a couple of years. But you grew up in this Washington area. Tell us how you got into playing the piano and growing up here in D.C.
Yeah, most certainly. At around the age of 8, my family attended a pair of Duke Ellington concerts at Georgetown University. The Duke himself presiding over the piano. It was his last year among us, 1974. And I got to hear the band in person with Duke at the piano, and not understanding what I was taking in, I was overwhelmed by the experience and kind of hooked on music from that point on. And from there I started tinkering with the piano, playing by ear, showing some talent for it. Eventually teamed up with a great teacher who you probably heard of, and your listeners, Lester Carr of Chevy Chase, Maryland, who was a regular at Kennedy Center and other auspicious activities. He was my teacher all through high school, and that's pretty much how I got started.
Fantastic. When you were starting kind of underage, hanging out some of the jazz clubs in the D.C. area also at that time, before your family moved to New Jersey.
Yeah.
What were some of the clubs you hung out at?
Well, the Pigfoot. The Pigfoot. Which is,
Bill Harris's Pigfoot with John Malachi as a pianist there.
In Northeast, and I was about 15 years old, and the people were, the people in charge and the people in the audience, the musicians, were all most welcoming and eager to encourage a young man, getting his start, and that was a remarkable experience. There was another place you'll remember called Mr. Wise.
Of course, right. Well, there were two different places. Mr. Wise was on Rhode Island Avenue, and Jimmy McPhail's Gold Room was further to the southeast, while still in Northeast, on Bladensburg Road. So, all these clubs were really just great hangouts, and really, Jimmy McPhail, a vocalist with Duke Ellington, had his own club, and of course...
Exactly. He used to make an appearance once in a while at these places, and to great acclaim, of course. He was like a local celebrity. John Malachi was sort of the dean of Washington, D.C. jazz piano, and he was, with tender loving care, he would MC the jam sessions. And another one I should mention was at the One Step Down, which only recently stopped operations, I think.
Well, that's been about 20 years, which is recent in our lifetimes,
Well, I guess so, yeah.
Yes, really, no, for real. In fact, Ann Mabuchi just passed away a couple of years ago, and
sorry to hear that.
She hung in there. Well. She was her and Joe were like it was like the mom and pop store, the way they bickered behind the bar, but loved the music. It was a great time for you to grow up in the area, but your family moved to New Jersey while you were still in your teens, but you kept persisting on the piano. How did you hook up with Lionel Hampton? Now that always intrigued me.
Interesting story. Still in high school, I snuck into a New Year's Eve bash, $1,000 a head at the Golden Nugget, which is now another hotel. And I walked past security wearing a suit, trying to look older. And I made my way backstage, and there the band was wailing away, And as they were coming off stage, one of the fellows in the band was a guy you'll remember very well, Paul Jeffrey, sax player, who Paul also played with Charles Mingus and Thelonious Monk, and he was an on and off regular with Lionel Hampton. And he said, "Hey, Hamp, I know you might be looking for a piano player. This young man here, I've been trying to recruit him to go to Rutgers for my jazz program. But why don't you talk to him, So Hamp called me over, and he asked me if I'd like to play for him, and he invited me up to his apartment, which was at 1 Lincoln Plaza in New York City, just across the street from Lincoln Center. And he lived 10 floors below Buddy Rich. It was kind of a famous enclave for the performing arts. And the bottom floor was the home office for ASCAP, the publishing clearinghouse for most jazz compositions, pop compositions. So I went up there. My dad came with me, and he was thrilled because my dad was an avid record collector and amateur pianist in his own right, and a huge fan and supporter of jazz. So he sat there as Hamp and I, the vibes and piano. We played for 3 hours straight.
Wow.
Going over a lot of material he had done with the Benny Goodman Quartet, for example. And that sold him. And, I was still on the underage side, but he hired me. And we a few days later, I was playing with the band opening night in Poughkeepsie at a club called The Chance. And then world tours and albums followed. It was a very exciting experience for a young guy.
George Wein just passed away. And I think it was in 1982. He took over the whole Kennedy Center for his Cool Jazz Festival. And I was the MC in the Opera House. And Lionel Hampton, closed out the concert. And I think you were in the piano for that performance,
I remember it very well. And I don't remember seeing you there specifically, but I remember it was a hugely successful show, and every aspect of it was run with extreme
absolutely. And
showbiz and professionalism.
He was closing out the show, and we had to close it down at 11, and Hamp just wanted to keep on playing.
Yeah, typical. But he'd go all night if he could.
You're right. Well, you went on to work with some important guitarist. Les Paul, of course, was your mainstay for years, but also Larry Correio. Tell us about those two connections.
Okay. One day I get a call from a great bass player named Jerry Bruno, and he said, Les Paul would like you to come down and sit in with him at the Iridium. This was in the summer of 2003. And I said, how did that come about? He said, well, Bucky Pizzarelli recommended you. Les wants to add a piano to his trio. So I was flattered that Bucky Pizzarelli would recommend me, but he did. And I went down there and played a couple of sets with Les, and we just went from there. I stayed with him for the last 6 years of his mortal existence, most of which he spent on stage. He played almost up to the last night of his life. I'm not exaggerating too much.
Wow,
he played
that's incredible.
Until the early summer of 2009, and he died in August of that year. And we toured, and we had a weekly gig in New York, and every famous jazz guitarist from the world of rock and roll and jazz would regularly make the pilgrimage to hear Les Paul. So the place was always celebrity-studded and packed.
Oh, I'm
played
sure.
Monday nights. And Rusty, no kidding, I think you've witnessed it yourself. There were lines down the street, as you might remember, to get in just to see this spectacle. And Les Paul was still in his 90s, still playing great.
Still playing. That's incredible. Absolutely. Well, Larry Correio gave you the nickname Johnny Chops. How was your connection with Larry?
Okay, so Larry was one of our sit-in guests, and he had heard me play with Mel Torme before that, and he tucked my name away in his memory. He opened for Mel Torme in Connecticut at a theater in Stamford, and he says, I have to get with this piano player with Mel Torme. He's wonderful, thinking of me. So later, when he came in to sit in with Les Paul, he said, I've been thinking about you ever since that day, 7 or 8 years ago when you and I shared the stage with Mel Torme, and now I get to play with you again. So he took me on the road with him, and we did about a year's worth of touring, and we did an album of one of his very challenging musical suites that he composed and notated called Montgomery.
Oh, yes.
A tribute to the civil rights movement in jazz. And it was tremendous.
Oh, yeah, it's a very important recording.
Very important recording, and I'm thrilled and honored to have been a part of it. And we globetrotted a little bit. We mostly played around New York City, but I had the great fortune to play with Larry towards the end of his career as well, because he left us all too soon. As you know,
yeah, it was much too young.
A year or two after that.
Absolutely. There was
in his prime.
He performed at Blues Alley, and there was like an afternoon session for Voice of America that was taped for broadcast, and I got to talk to him quite a bit in the afternoon after the set, and told him I just did liner notes for your album that came out around that time, because he did the liner notes for your earlier album for Patuxent.
That's right.
You know, so it was good to catch up with him. Well, let's talk about your own ensembles. We've been featuring actually the three recordings that I did notes for tonight. You had one with the two tenors and the other one with two guitarists.
Right. Okay, so in recent years, I was signed up until the pandemic with a jazz agency out of New York, Prestige Artists, headed up by Farrell Teich. And he was a very good manager, and he gave me a lot of creative input. And he put together a sextet for me with two tenor saxes, rhythm guitar, bass, drums, myself, and piano, and I wrote all the arrangements. We made an album together, and we did some touring, and we played most of the major clubs in New York. And then we focused on the trio after that. And you were part of both ventures, Rusty. You wrote the liner notes for both albums. The trio album that came out with Bernard Lynette and Boots Mallison, which we're all very proud of, came about because we shifted what we were doing to the trio. And then we also started up the John Colianni Jazz Orchestra, 17-piece big band. And we rehearsed at the Musicians Union in New York City on where it is now 48th Street between 8th and 9th. We appeared 6 or 7 times each at the Blue Note and Birdland, and making quite a name for ourselves, getting played on the radio. We were played live on WKCR, et cetera, et cetera. And then what happened? What do you think happened? It starts with a P, the pandemic.
Right.
Everything shut down. During that time, in my wisdom as trying to be a businessman along with being a musician, I bought some property. I bought a house a little further to the south in Philadelphia. And one of the things, and I'm sort of dividing my time professionally between this area and New York. I'm pretty much more based in New York still, but a lot in both areas. But among other things, I've started to work with that big band again, and we've been rehearsing and doing live sessions, public sessions, at a wonderful studio called Soundplex, and we're getting great results, and we're gearing up for gigs. In fact, we have one coming up 20th of October at Chris's Jazz Cafe with my big band. One other thing I should mention is I've been doing numerous gigs with Wayne Henderson. He's sort of the Art Blakey of New York these days. He started up his own sextet, and I'm sort of his featured artist on piano. And we're doing a series of wonderful concerts at the New Rochelle Library for their jazz series. In fact, we'll be there on October 9th. Also, I'm playing at Mesro with my trio. You know Mesro, of course.
Of course, and Spike Wilner does a lot of streaming with I've been watching the Mesro and the Smalls performances religiously. So I hope yours gets to be visualized over Facebook, that I could see it down here.
Definitely, I think it will. It's the 11th of November, 11/11, easy to remember.
Okay, absolutely.
And I hope all your listeners will check that out. And then the following day, my trio is playing a concert at Penn State at their beautiful theater with a guest artist, vocalist, Elizabeth Webb, who's a very popular jazz singer in Western PA, and she's planning on invading New York herself. You'll hear more from her at some point. And other scattered gigs, but that's the noteworthy stuff for the moment.
Well, it's really great. So now, all your recent recordings are on the Patuxent label. How do folks track them down to be able to pick up on them?
Right. Okay. Several outlets online you can get it. Spotify and Pandora are two. Another is Amazon. They carry all the Patuxent line.
Good. Okay.
Patuxent records a wide swath of artists.
Yeah.
Mostly jazz, but some bluegrass, rock, R&B, blues, a lot of things. A great, great label, a traditional label in the best sense. The artists are actually paid and recognized properly for their efforts. It's not like a self-produced deal like you see so often these days. It's a real studio with a real label chief, and it's great. But anyway, those places, and also they have a website, and I'll spell it out for your listeners, pxrec.com. That's pxrec, P-X-R-E-C, Patuxent Records, pxrec.com. Patuxent, interestingly enough, has a Maryland essence to it. I'm from Maryland,
Yep.
and it's great to be on a Maryland label, but the Patuxent River, as you know, Rusty, runs through Maryland.
Absolutely. Know the background to the label, and all praises to Tom Minty for keeping it together and getting you out. So we're gonna.
Yeah, he's marvelous and a great engineer and a very discerning judge of talent and a creative guy.
Well,
Tom Minty.
Your new record, Ahead of the Crowd, it's one of those great swinging trio recordings, and again, it's a great mix of standards. So even some R&B pieces like "Let's Stay Together," but your own originals are included in this. And I've queued up "Long Count." So how do you approach composition, and what's behind your long count?
Right. The title to that, I'm a sports fan, like everybody is in my age group, and I named that after the Jack Dempsey-Gene Tunney fight, the long count battle. When I don't know if people are still familiar with it, but it was a dramatic thing. So I named the song after it. It was inspired somewhat by my admiration for performers like Ray Charles and Ray Bryant. And you'll hear a little bit, I don't copy anybody per se, Rusty, but you'll hear a little bit of the influence of those kind of fellows in this piece. And it reflects in the writing and the arrangement, I believe.
Fantastic. Well, John Colianni, thanks for the call tonight. And again, the new release is called Ahead of the Crowd. And here's his long count. Thanks again, John, for calling in.
Thank you, Rusty. Great talking to you.